So we're going to talk about the United Front. What is it? The United Front is a tactic for revolutionaries to temporarily unite in joint action with reformist working class organizations. That's about as small as I could get it. Well, not quite. I had to make the whole slideshow, but the shorthand is to march separately, strike together. And this tactic was developed by Marxists in a period of revolutionary possibility, and it was matured in defense against fascism. So this was in the teens to the 30s is the period of when the tactic was really sort of developed. What are the goals of the United Front? To win reforms or gains for the class, for defense, like against fascism, for instance, to advance struggle and organization, to challenge the ruling ideas or bourgeois ideological hegemony, if you prefer. We like to say the ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class, and those are going to be dominant unless challenged. Another goal is to test and refine our ideas and to train our forces. And then finally, we want to prove in struggle that to other working class fighters that we fight better, that we see more clearly, and that we are more audacious and resolute. That's a kind of paraphrase of Trotsky. What the United Front isn't? What isn't the United Front? It's not a catch-all, well, at least as used by communists or Trotskyists in particular, Leninists. It's not a catch-all term for unity. In popular usage, that's different. Which is why we have to specify that this is a specific tactic for us. It's not a permanent or even a long-term alliance. It's not for dissolution into another organization. It's not for joint propaganda, but joint action. The United Front is not an alliance between revolutionary organizations, though it can inform how we relate to them. And it's not a comprehensive political agreement, but is limited to concrete near-term action. All right, so to dig into that march separately, strike together shorthand, the first principle of the United Front is separateness. It's a bit of a paradox, right? The United Front presupposes organizational, this is Trotsky again, organizational independence, ideological clarity, and revolutionary firmness, right? So it's a way of conducting struggle for a cohesive revolutionary organization that intends to remain cohesive. And so the United Front requires the freedom to criticize what, again, Trotsky called our temporary semi-allies, which I love that. So keeping them at arm's length, you know. But it also like anticipates the failures of reformism, you know, like look, we didn't become revolutionaries because we thought that maybe reformism would work, you know. We have irreconcilable differences with reformists, which you know, reformism anyway. So we have differences as to, as Duncan Hallis said, ends and means, objectives and tactics, methods and traditions. These differences are far too deep and great and deep-rooted for organic unity to be a realistic objective. Organic unity between revolutionaries and reformists, that is. And Trotsky said, to put it very clearly, that reformists are the democratic doctors of capitalism. They want to make things better, patch it up, keep it going. And they ultimately will play that role, whereas we are its revolutionary gravediggers, or at least aspire to be. Again, Uncle L, we will work with anyone, but we're going all the way. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot in here, and that I'd like to talk about. We always need to find those temporary semi-allies that will go some part of the way with us, and hopefully some will come with us the rest of the way. So why do we take this approach? Why did Marxists arrive at the approach of the United Front? Well, it's based on some theoretical underpinnings. So one is that socialism is the process of working class self-emancipation. We can't do this without, we can't advance towards socialism. We can't advance socialism without the vast majority of the class, engaging in it. So convincing workers of revolutionary politics must be at the heart of our strategy. And until we also understand that, and have observed that until revolution is imminent, revolutionaries will be in a minority and reformism will be the dominant outlook. And then two other ideas that lead us to this approach is that the leadership and the membership of reformist organizations, which are unions, social justice organizations, and NGOs, other grassroots independent organizations. There's a difference between the leadership and the membership. The leadership will ultimately seek to preserve the system and to side with capital. It's in the definition, it's definitional. That's what reformism is. We're to be clear, we support the struggle for reforms, but we don't want to be limited to that. Whereas the membership of reformist organizations can be won to revolutionary politics by reformism's inevitable failures and betrayals, if we can expose them properly and hopefully be there to offer some of the right conclusions. So let's talk about history, basically. Here's Ernst Thälmann, Communist Party of Germany leader, pushing the social fascist line in Berlin. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I would say that the roots of the United Front go back to the Communist Manifesto, at least. In that document, it says, the communists fight for the attainment of the immediate aims, for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class. But in the movement of the present, they also represent and take care of the future of the movement. So there's this tending to the present, current, concrete, immediate, as well as trying to look down the road at our ultimate goals. We reserve the right to take up a critical position. We always try to instill the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So we're always bringing the class analysis. We want to, and the revolutionary point of view, and then and the property question is the last bit here. Sorry. Well, the last bit, it has 2 points. One, we support every revolutionary movement against social and political order, and we bring the property question. So I think that the spirit is here already. The next historical point of development was actually proposed by Father Gapon in the Great Dress Rehearsal, the failed 1905 Russian Revolution. Gapon, who was famously shot down on Bloody Sunday, proposed what, sort of a proto-United Front, and the Bolsheviks supported the idea. The tactic was ill-defined, the term didn't exist. But again, Lenin was already on top of the key components. The preservation of complete independence on any points of principle, politics, or organization, and then fighting unity. These are the core components. And he goes on to emphasize the independence bit by saying we don't want to lump together heterogeneous elements. And this is that march together, march separately, strike together. I always get it confused. Sometimes I say march together, strike separately. I don't know. Seems like same difference, almost. All right. Next stop on our tour, August 1917. So now the Tsar has been overthrown, and the provisional government replaced the Tsar. And that provisional government repressed the Bolsheviks. It attacked, and these were Mensheviks, these were socialist revolutionaries, these were people that, were in the struggle with the Bolsheviks. And then they ascended to this provisional government. They repressed the Bolsheviks. They attacked their presses. They jailed Trotsky. They forced Lenin into hiding. Still, the Bolsheviks proposed a united front with the parties, with those parties, to prevent a military coup by the Russian general Kornilov. And Trotsky famously once went directly from prison to a meeting of this united front with those parties responsible for his jailing, the leaders of the Mensheviks and the SRs, which, like business never personal. You know what I mean? I kind of love that. The fact that Kornilov and Kerensky, so Kornilov was the Russian general who was attempting a coup, and Kerensky was the socialist revolutionary and the head of the provisional government. The fact that they stood for the same system didn't preclude the need for joint action against the coup. They were both capitalists. They both, stood for that preservation, but there was still a need for joint action. The United Front, it mobilized Petrograd workers, and it defeated Kornilov. Bolsheviks won a lot of respect, and they played a leading role. And ultimately, this laid the groundwork for Kerensky to be overthrown just 2 months later. And it helped that the Bolsheviks never returned the weapons that he provided them to fight for his defense. And so real quick on the Russian Revolution, I mean, we could talk about each of these like all day, and I would literally like to do that. But within the Soviets, the Bolsheviks united with and maintained independence from the reformists, the Mensheviks and the SRs. So they fought both alongside them and against them at the same time, and that was critical to the success of the revolution. It was critical to winning larger and larger sections to the revolutionary politics and to the road that they ended up needing to take. So now we're going to move over to Germany and fast forward a few years, January 1921. Paul Levy was the leader of the German Communist Party, the KPD, after the 1919 assassinations of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. And excuse me, Levy developed an open letter policy, basically openly calling on other organizations to act in United Front. It proposed joint action with other workers' organizations. And this policy was later generalized by the Comintern to become the United Front. Lenin praised the open letter as a model to win over the majority of the working class. A couple months later, the March Action happened. And this was a catastrophic failed insurrection by the KPD, which had different sections. And the left communist section was dominant, and left communists are not like better communists. Sounds like it, but it's like a particular communism associated with Bordiga in Italy and Panikkok in the Netherlands mostly. But anyway, but the left communists in the KPD denounced the United Front as a form of accommodation with reformism. They were ultra leftists. That they had a theory of the offensive, which I think we can compare to the propaganda of the deed from anarchists. And this basically gave theoretical expression to revolutionary impatience. And it sought to take action that provoked the masses into action behind them. So splashy terrorism is one example, you know. And you know, the Marxist assessment is typically that it actually demobilizes people instead. And so this was a failed insurrection, and this actually did really harm the movement there. So all right, so the Comintern. The Comintern is short for Communist International, and that's the third iteration of an organization devoted to advancing world revolution. And so we have the Comintern, and then there were multiple congresses in the Comintern, and you know, everybody's favorite is the third, right? Everybody loves the third Congress. Some of the fourth, I guess, but all right. So in the third Congress in July 1921, it was resolved that the most important question before the Comintern today is to win predominating influence over the majority of the working class and to bring its decisive strata into struggle. So to win influence for communist ideas, this was the most important question. And the fourth Congress endorsed the United Front with Social Democrats. And this was in 1922, and around that time, the KPD back in Germany, I say back in Germany because the congresses were, I don't actually know where all the different congresses were. Anyway.
Moscow.
Were they all in Moscow?
I think so.
Okay. All right, that was my instinct, thank you. So the KPD back in Germany had some success in employing it. So now I want to hop over to China. So I'm trying to do this in order of time. So we're kind of hopping all over the globe. So in China, the Comintern ordered. So the Comintern had, you know, there were parties all over the world, right? And so the Chinese Communist Party had a relationship with the Comintern and was being guided by it. And the Comintern started to turn, which is our next slide, but when it did, it ordered the Chinese Communist Party to subordinate itself to a bourgeois nationalist party called the Kuomintang. And Trotsky was the only one who opposed this at the time. As a result, the Chinese Communist Party actively restrained rebellion so as not to alarm their bourgeois partners in the front. And they promoted illusions in the Kuomintang, and they literally disarmed the workers' movement. Let's see, they sacrificed class independence, disoriented the movement by uniting around nationality, not class. They dropped all talk or talk of workers' councils and never made it to China in this period. And there was a real diminishing of horizons. There was talk of like a revolution for rent reduction at one point in this period. And then ultimately the Kuomintang smashed the movement, crushed strikes, and terrorized and massacred thousands of communists and other workers. so back to Moscow, I guess. Lenin was incapacitated by a stroke in 1923. Stalin, Kamenev, and Zinoviev formed a bloc in opposition to Trotsky and Karl Radek in the Comintern. These were the leading Bolsheviks in the Comintern at the time. The Comintern began to change from a means of internationalizing revolution, of trying to spread it worldwide, to a tool of USSR foreign policy. This is as it became what we call Stalinized. The Comintern became Stalinized. So the Fifth Congress of the Comintern reversed course on the United Front. Zinoviev said the SPD, that's the German Social Democratic Party, has become a wing of fascism. So this was the strongest socialist party in the world at the time. And Zinoviev condemned them as a wing of fascism. The fascists are the right hand and the Social Democrats are the left hand of the bourgeoisie. They both stood for capitalism, ultimately, you know. But to equate them, you know, is another story. And at this time, Zetkin and Clara Zetkin and Karl Radek opposed this, but this ended up winning, and ushering in the Comintern's third period, which spanned from 1928 to 1935. In this period, the analysis was that capitalism was near death, and the theory of social fascism equated the Social Democrats and the fascists, which precluded any united front with them. Under the influence of the now fully Stalinized Comintern, the KPD refused to work with the SPD to combat the Nazis. And it should be said that the SPD also refused. In fact, as some, you know, online jerk had to remind a comrade of ours that the Iron Front, the three arrows in the popular anti-fascist symbol, like one of them, that was an SPD symbol, and the three arrows stand for the monarchy, the Nazis, and the communists. So, you know, it's not as if the hostility wasn't mutual. But ultimately, like, not uniting disorganized the fight against Hitler, you know, making this equation of the social fascism equation, disorganized the fight against Hitler, and not the Nazis smashed the entire workers' movement. Vietnam, I don't want to skip any of these, but I feel like I'm going too long. Let's see, so in the 30s in Vietnam, there was a united front between Trotskyists, Stalinists, and revolutionary nationalists that restricted their propaganda to issues that they agreed upon. Because they abstained from criticism, the Trotskyist supporters were not educated in the difference between Marxism and the Stalinists' counter-revolutionary class collaborationism. When Stalin allied with France and Britain, so in World War II, the Stalinists in Vietnam called for the defense of France, their colonial occupiers. And on orders from Moscow in, I think this was 1937, Ho Chi Minh broke the front and labeled the Trotskyists fascists for opposing French colonial authorities. Another misuse. So in this next period, so this is after the third period of the Comintern, motivated by the Soviet Union's military alliance with imperialist powers against the fascist powers, a new theory was developed, or a new approach. Or I should say it was systematized. The Popular Front versus the United Front. The Popular Front encouraged cross-class alliances and blending into the political mainstream. And it subordinated revolutionaries to not only reformists, but the liberal bourgeoisie. So first of all, like, the idea is not to subordinate ourselves to reformists, but to join in united action with them. So not only did it, so it changed that, but it also added this cross-class element, this uniting with sections of the bourgeoisie. Suddenly, in the United States, the CPUSA suddenly lined up behind FDR and had this weird social patriotic thing going for them for a while, and they've backed Democrats ever since. This is a picture of a little action coalition we had a few years ago that includes Coffee Not Cops, which a comrade brought up today in our organizing. I guess that group still exists or exists again in different parts of the country. It's kind of funny. Basically like a anti-police outreach. I think locally, at least, it was, I always thought it was in response to Coffee with Cops, which was a police propaganda effort where you could go and sit with a cop and talk to them and, see how human they are or whatever. So anyway, so what's different now? We don't have a labor party in this country, at least. We don't really have, we don't have reformist socialist parties. We don't have mass working class organizations, really. The unions, even unions that as close as we can get, represent a small fraction of the class. There's also no revolutionary organization of any social weight. And so that allows reformist leadership to ignore us without being discredited. We're like little gnats flying around at this point. But the framework of the United Front remains relevant, and the tactic can't be applied mechanically or schematically. Like we should, work to uphold the spirit, not the letter of the law. So how do we apply the spirit of the United Front? Very broadly, we should work for principled fighting unity where possible. And all these are wrapped up with each other, but this is particularly wrapped up with, we should work to advance social movements and build durable organization. We should fight for reforms, but again, like to circle back to like what the Communist Manifesto was talking about, we need to tend to the present and the future of the movement, and think of our own organizations, but also think beyond them. I'd like to add that. We should seek out and foster genuine political spaces with democratic debate, open organizing. We should encourage the engagement of rank and file activists versus reliance on the leadership and the bureaucracy. We should fight for class independence and keep our organizing political spaces free from bourgeois interference, typically via the Democratic Party. But I think the NGO complex is another section that we have to be cautious about. So anyway, we should fight for good politics in hostile territory. So that means rejecting opportunism and passive tailism, taking, not just going along for the sake of numbers or quote unquote unity. We should take a political lead, but we should also, on the other hand, reject sectarianism and be willing to work with others and to challenge bad ideas. Because when, like the sectarian removal of ourselves from certain spaces that we deem to be too reformist or too, to have too many bad or mixed ideas, means that those ideas go unchallenged. So here's a quick case study. This was from a year and a half ago, the Close the Concentration Camps Coalition. This was that coalition was a national united front project initiated by ex-ISO comrades with Justin Akers-Chacon and Kim Gasper, some other comrades. And it had two demands: close the concentration camps and let them all in. Very, very clear. So like one's already in the name. The demand's already in the name. How are you going to change that? Well, some folks wanted to change that. Locally, the Boulder ISC, which was the International Socialist Collective, which was the name that they went to after the ISO dissolved. We went to the Denver Communists. So we organized it locally, primarily Boulder ISC. We were joined by the PSL and Lights for Liberty. Lights for Liberty was an NGO that sprang up for the elections. I'm not sure if we could call it a Democratic Party front group, but same, definitely existed in that network of money. And there were some other groups too, but these are the relevant players here. So together, the PSL and Lights for Liberty sought to lower the demands of the coalition and secretly invite police into the action, keep it a secret from the action, from the protesters. And in my mind, the PSL made a tailist, opportunist bargain. They were willing to be the tail of this liberal organization without challenging their politics, and it was a bargain to gain access to the crowd that they thought that Lights for Liberty could deliver. That's my assessment. Boulder and Denver, on the other hand, held the political line of those two slogans. And refused to agree to a gag order, which was requested. So Lights for Liberty requested that we not criticize each other. A comrade, I wasn't actually too involved in this, the planning stuff, but a comrade from Boulder refused and ended up using the action to do exactly what that gag order wanted to prevent, criticizing liberal misleadership. So somehow it got lost in here, but the coalition fell apart, and PSL and Lights for Liberty split off and called their own action, a separate one, and we called one nearby that ended up merging because we both wanted to be at ICE at the concentration camp itself. Oops. But my assessment of holding the line and allowing the PSL and Lights for Liberty to dip out of the coalition was that it wasn't a sectarian move where we were holding to, purity politics over, over a fighting unity. Instead, I think that Richard in particular, but also Ben and Carlos and other comrades from the IMT also, I think that they repelled an attack by the liberal bourgeoisie, right? So Lights for Liberty parachuted in, wanted to, dominate this this space and this issue in this rising moment to guide it into electoral politics. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I look at it, but we could talk about it, So the actions met at GEO, at the concentration camp. Protesters, including family of some folks that are or were held there, broke off to protest on ICE property and vandalized some flags. They replaced an American flag with a Mexican flag, and they flew an upside down, defaced Black Lives Matter flag. And, this was I think at least two of the people had family members in this camp at the time, at least one, and maybe one that they had been deported or something like that. Anyway, it was actually really rad, and it brought, it did what it did what we want out of a protest. Like it got attention, and it was a good spark. At the time, the PSL tried to police that breaking over into the property of the concentration camp and the flag stuff, and then this was followed by pretty vigorous state repression. Like they put out a huge bounty on the head of the protesters that dared to mess with these precious flags, and that allowed for some. I mean, that was terrible. We supported at least one of those comrades in court support and whatnot, but it also laid bare what's going on here. It offered another opportunity to critique the system. So almost done here, y'all. Thanks for hanging in here. So what is this? This is, I'd like to make this better than it is, but I was trying to get a little chart of some various approaches. And so we got the United Front at the top, and I've talked about that enough. But other approaches include vague unity, which is what a lot of people mean when they say United Front. And that vague unity is sort of like a non-aggression pact, is one of the things that it usually includes. Like, oh, we're all here getting along, and we don't really have any ways of, any generalized ways of dealing with that, but we want to, just be nice. And big tent organizing can be like this too. And so with the rejection of mutual criticism, ultimately, I would say, comes an adaptation to reformism. It doesn't advance revolutionary politics. Another tactic is to go it alone, to reject joint action. And so I would consider this sectarian, ultra-leftist, sometimes elitist, or always elitist, sometimes adventurist, and substitutionist. Like, if we can't activate a mass, then we can try to do what we wish the mass would do, with only our 10, 20, 50, 100 people, and so this rejection of joint action is associated with anarchism and left communism. I call it sectarian because it's sometimes motivated by a unwillingness to fight alongside people with bad or mixed politics. And this leads to isolation, demobilization, and ineffective resistance. The Popular Front is we talked about that a little bit already. Involves a cross-class alliance that includes the liberal bourgeoisie, and it's class collaborationist by definition. It's the definition, and it's opportunist. And this is also associated with liberalism, social democracy. I mean, typically, when its standard manifestation now is to think that we have to advance through the Democratic Party, is to unite with the Democratic Party, to use their ballot line, all the various ways of basically being dominated by the Democratic Party. But it's had different forms in other times. And I would say this leads to defeat, disorientation, and the strengthening of the enemy and their system. And then there's also front groups. Front groups are sort of, pseudo-united fronts that are controlled by a revolutionary organization in an elitist, commandist, undemocratic, and sometimes deceptive way. Some of the drawbacks, there, or it's difficult to build a mass audience, and that it doesn't create a legitimate political space if it's being controlled by a behind the scenes front group. Then we're not building the democratic political skills of the membership as fully as we could be. So I feel like maybe I could be a little more generous to front groups there, but I think there are exceptions, and but that's my general opinion. And that's it. Cool. All right. Well, it feels like I should have included a summary, but I didn't.